We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane Page. I am your host, Shane Half, and you can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHalfNFL. I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Jonny, how are you doing this evening?
You're still saying this evening, Shane. The live viewers will know it's not the evening. Yeah, normally we record in the afternoon. I've got the week off, which is very nice. So we're recording early. It's very early if you're Americans over there. For me, it's about afternoon. You can tell it's early because I've actually got sunlight. For those of you watching, coming in from my blinds. Yeah, I'm good. A week off is weird to me because a week off from my normal job just ends up being a busier week for my Eagles work. So I've ended up probably watching as much film the past 3 days. This morning alone, it's nearly 3 o'clock here, and I've watched a little bit of Keegan, the guard. I watched a bit more Johnny Wilson, and then I started watching McMahon, the final Eagles pick. So I feel like I'm a little bit slow on the draft picks this year. So yeah, everything's good though. Nice to have a bit of time off and actually watch film in the morning and not when I'm coming home from work and sort of rush through it. So I feel like I know the Eagles draft picks very well now, which I always think is good before the season. Otherwise, you end up sort of figuring them out as you go along during the season. It becomes harder. So, yeah, it should be a good one today. I think there's some quite interesting players. Maybe one not so interesting, in my opinion. Might talk about him as well in Will Shipley. But the other two in particular are a lot more interesting for me.
Yeah, my thing watching draft picks is I always, in my head, I carve out like this role for each rookie and how they're going to get on the field. And then half of them never do. And that always hurts just a little bit because not to get ahead of the game, but I watch Ainias Smith and I'm like, oh, they could give him a few carries. He could be a move piece, your wide receiver 3, and he'll probably maybe return punts or something. But in my head, I'm building it up. I'm like, yeah, they could get him touches doing this, and he can bring this to the team. And so I definitely have eternal optimism with rookies until the season starts. And even though I'll see like the weaknesses on film, I'm like, but they could use them this way. Like, this is what you could do. And then it never happens. So this is somewhat an exercise in futility for me. Every year when I look at the rookies, I'm just like, yes, this guy's going to do this. And it just doesn't happen half the time.
I think it's so difficult as well because you forget not how bad college is. That's not fair, but how just the caliber is so different. Like I was watching, I can't remember his first name, Trotter Jr, isn't it? The Eagles' fifth or sixth round guard. And I always do like a little transition bit at the bottom, like, and why I think he fell. And I think his big, we'll do him next week. No, I'm talking about him now, but he's fresh in my mind. Is like versatility, like played one position, basically a left guard his whole career. And you don't want backup offensive linemen who can play one position. But you watch his film and it's like, he's good. Like he's not dominating, but he's very good. And you think, has he got in the 6th round? But you forget he's not playing against great defensive tackles every week. And it's so hard to project, which is why I always think looking at traits and how they fit in your offense is so much more valuable than how good you think they're going to be. Because the truth is that it's not that we don't know what these players are like. It's just that we don't see them against top tier competition every week. Because you can go and watch any of these guys. Like, as I said, I watched there's loads of Trevor Keegan film out there, which is brilliant because JJ McCarthy, obviously. So I spent way too long going down the rabbit hole yesterday. By the way, like JJ McCarthy as well. I think the Vikings have got a pretty decent QB there, seeing as I hadn't watched him before. So I was half watching Keegan, half watching the QB. And you just realize like he looks good. Like, he looks really good. Then you remember he went in the 6th round, may not make the roster, possibly will never start a game. And it's why it's a fun thing to look at the rookies, but it's also a bit maddening because you just wish you'd actually see more of them. But yeah, we're going to get into free for them today, aren't we? If you can't read the title or you haven't seen it, we're going to talk about free today because if we try and do any more than 3 on one show, we will simply never, ever end the show. So it is a little bit late to do rookie breakdowns, but if you want to talking about them. So we're going to move to number 3 today.
Yeah, I'll fact check myself live on the air here. Trevor Keegan was the Eagles' 3rd 5th round pick. So he was a 5th round pick. I was thinking they had 3 6th round picks, but not that that's super relevant, but some viewer would comment and let us know because you guys are great about that. So Without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. Jonny did say we're going to cover 3 guys today, and we're just going in order. So we're going to start off with Will Shipley, who the Eagles drafted in the 4th round with pick 127 overall. And we'll follow the same format we did last week. We'll talk physical profile, stats. We'll do some strengths and weaknesses and show a few clips. So to start off with Shipley, Shipley is 5'11", which is 57th percentile for height, 206 pounds, which is 28th percentile for weight. He ran a 4.45 40-yard dash with a 4.1 shuttle and a 6.88 3-cone. And then overall, he had a 9.57 relative athletic score, which you might have seen other places. It's slightly different. In Jonny's article, it was 9.61, and that's just because relative athletic scores shift every time somebody else tests. But 9.57 is his most recent number that at this point shouldn't really change until testings happen next year. He had some of his stats in the last 2 seasons. He had 40 targets each of those 2 years. So he's a guy that was utilized out of the backfield a lot at Clemson. He was 95th in yards after contact per attempt. And these rushing stats are going to be among players with 100 or more rushing attempts last year, which is 153 guys. So he was 95th out of 153 in yards after contact per attempt. He was 118th in missed tackles force per attempt, 35th in breakaway run rate, which is a breakaway run is a run that's 15 or more yards. 9% of his runs went for 15 plus yards. Per PFF, he was a terrible pass blocker with pass blocking grades of 33.1, 20.3, and 27.6. He was 11th among running backs in snaps out of the slot at 16.9%, and he was 52nd in yards after catch per reception at 8.8 yards, and he was 70th in drop percentage at 9.4%. So you look at the stats, Shipley was a guy that was used out of the backfield a lot. He was used in the slot, not particularly elusive, doesn't really get yards after contact, but just kind of a steady, semi-reliable player. And so, Jonny, you've got an article up on Bleeding Green Nation that everybody should go read. But you broke down some film. There's some clips in there. But before we get to clips, what was just your general impression watching Shipley? What are some of his biggest strengths?
Yeah, so the good news is you can't lie when you watch someone pre-draft and rank them for Bleeding Green. So I wasn't the biggest Will Shipley fan, so I can't lie post-draft. I didn't hate him. I had him like round 4, round 5, which is basically where the Eagles took him. It's just for like philosophically, I want explosiveness out of backups rather than like, I mean, we use a phrase in England. I don't know if Steady Eddie is a phrase that's made it over to the States as well.
I know that one.
Yeah, you guys use Jag a lot, don't you? Just a guy. That's who Shipley is to me. Like, he's not going to bust. I mean, I say that pretty confidently. He's produced for 3 straight years, a big program. Like, he knows how to play. He's a perfectly fine player. I just think he's an adequate player, pretty much. Like, if you squint, and PFF Sam made this comparison, if you really squint, you can see a little bit of Christian McCaffrey, and maybe like Christian McCaffrey's left toe. You can just about see a bit of him in there. You can see like he can do everything. He can do a little bit of everything. I just don't think he does anything well. I think that's exactly how I explained him in my pre-draft summary. Like, he can catch the ball at the backfield. He can hang on. He excels in. I think his best thing is in the screen game, like out in space. I think his short area speed and elusiveness in tight spaces is his like probably like, if you look at the trait that's going to allow him to win, like really quick feet. I think he's more of a scheme fit than a talent, if that makes sense. And I think the Eagles drafted him specifically to run a lot of outside zone this year, which I've just got a feeling the Eagles are going to sort of change their running game quite a lot this year under Kellen Moore. And I think outside zone is going to be a big deal. And I think Shipley understands the zone running scheme really, really well. Everything else is just fine. Like, fine blocker. I actually think his blockings, I've seen a lot of people say, like, the Eagles have finally got a blocker. And I'm not sure his pass protection is as good as some people think. But he's fine. Again, like, fine contact balance, average speed. He tested far better than he plays. The testing's a little bit odd to me. We might talk about that when we get to the weaknesses. But yeah, just does like everything fine. Like, if you want a guy that can come in for a few games, and if he has to start a couple of with the Eagles offensive line. He can keep things going, but I don't think he does anything that wows you. I don't really have any other clips, Shane, except the ones you've got on your film thread that really stand out. So should we start with the outside?
Yeah, let's do it.
I think the Eagles will really like him. Yeah, no, it's fine. Okay. You talk about these clips first, and I'll add. But I know outside zone is the big one for me. Like the more you watch Shipley's film, the more you just see outside zone runs over and over again. So talk to me about what you like from this one here.
Yeah, so your audio cut out for a second, by the way. So I thought you were done and started talking, and then it caught back up. So apologies if there's any audio difficulties out here. But yeah, one of the biggest things with Will Shipley, and where I think he's a good fit, and Jonny talked about it in his article, is he's got good vision, especially on outside zone runs. He's a quick accelerator. I wouldn't say he doesn't have breakaway speed, but he can stick his foot in the ground and make tight cuts to get upfield. And so there's two clips here of him running outside zone, and on outside zone, you're basically reading from the C gap to the A gap. So again, for those of you that don't know, if we I guess it's not numbering, if we letter the gaps from the inside out, from the center to the guard is the A gap, between the guard and the tackle is the B gap, outside the tackle is the C gap. And so on outside zone, you're taking the handoff and you read from outside in. And so you read first the C gap. If it's open, we're going to get there. If it's not, we go to the B gap. And if it's not open, we go to the A gap. And we're just looking for a place to cut this upfield. And I think it's what Shipley does really well. And so you can see, you're letting this guy come because we're trying to get outside. But if we look at this, if we read this back out, there's not a C gap that we can really hit. There's not a B gap we can really hit, but there's room here in the A gap. And so you're going to see Shipley get outside that guy and cut it back inside. And I just think that's such a good rep here from him. We'll watch it one more time. There's a second one here as well, but he just does a really good job of slow playing this to the outside. And then he sticks his foot in the ground and gets upfield. And then the second time, just you guys that are watching at home, watch this full speed and tell me where you would make the cut, and then realize you're doing it from a view that's backed off here. And you're not worried about getting hit. But I think Shipley just does a good job of sticking his foot in the ground, getting back upfield, and looking for a cutback lane. And so, you mentioned that Kellen Moore likes to run a lot of outside zone, and I think that's where Shipley was at his best. And so when we talk about this being a good scheme fit, maybe not the most talented guy, I do think he does fit pretty well with what the Eagles are going to look to have him do.
Yeah, I know people are listening to a Brit talk about this who you would probably imagine hasn't played the game. And football over here, I've coached a tiny bit in the UK, and when you watch clips like that, it's sometimes easier to pause the video and go, look at the C gap, that is hard. Like, that is really hard, and you can watch a lot of college guys that can't do that, and I'll give Shipley huge credit for that. That first one in particular, I think, is really, really nice. And for those of you wondering and maybe don't know as much about the sort of run game, the difference between, let's say, a gap scheme run is that you don't really have to read it out. A gap scheme run basically does what it says on the tin. It aims to hit a certain gap. So you might design, and we talk about gap scheme, things like counter or power, where basically you're following a lead blocker, a little bit more old school in some ways, the power run game. And that almost takes away some of the awareness that you need as a running back with the term scouts will use his vision. Shipley's really good at that. And that's why I said I don't worry about him busting. Like, you can get more explosive running backs that I like the look of, like Tyrone Tracy's, like, is it a Garendo that the 49ers took? But they're nowhere near as developed as Shipley. Like, the positive part is really easy to see from Shipley. You don't have to squint. Just watch him run outside zone. And outside zone is more than just a run play. And we're not going to talk about it now because we're going to save it for an off-season pod. But I'm really interested at the moment in the sort of like the blurring of the lines in the current NFL between the run and the pass game. And outside zone has been so popular for years because when you get defenses on the move, you essentially get them flowing. And the way of stopping outside zone is by really quickly flowing in the direction of outside zone. So guess what every good team does? They run play action and they run the opposite way. And we see this as a Shanahan staple going back a long time. And it's something the Eagles haven't really done a lot. And that's why I think Kellen Moore is going to bring it this year, because he has done it a lot. Saquon Barkley is a really good outside zone runner, and Will Shipley is as well. So I think there's I always think the draft gives you a little idea on what schematic trends you might see from your own team this year as well. And I think it's interesting that they drafted a guy who quite clearly excels in the zone run game. I think that's pretty much all I've got clips-wise, Shane. So if I talk a little bit about weaknesses and why I didn't like him as much.
Before you do that, let me show one more clip.
Go for it. If you got one more, do it.
Yeah, this is one. I think he's really good with like his rush plan and what he wants to do. Watch the way that he manipulates the linebacker here.
Yep, sorry, I knew we had this clip. I'm an idiot because you showed 2 and 1 in the first one. There we go.
Yeah, so watch number 31. I assume this is a linebacker. Maybe it's a safety that's just playing in the box. But Shipley is going to sort of fake this cutback to get 31 to commit, and then he's going to get this ball back up inside. And so the way he manipulates this guy out of position is just really good. And then, of course, cutting in the open field makes 2 guys miss. And that's sort of what you get with Shipley. He doesn't have that breakaway speed, but I think he's got good vision for the game, and he's got a good rush plan. And he's slippery. He goes down pretty easy once you grab him, but he's a little hard to get hands on. And so I just thought that was a really cool clip, especially how he manipulates that linebacker before he even gets to the hole.
Yeah, that's an awesome run. That's like a really, really high level run, as you sort of stole one of the negatives away from me slightly, which is what you'd love there is for him to turn that into an 80-yard touchdown or something, which is where someone like Saquon Barkley does. But in the reality, in the NFL, you don't get a bunch of huge run plays anyway. Before I go on to the negatives, Shane, we got a comment from Anthony talking about Shipley in the pass game. Yeah, absolutely. So really like a very, very good route runner. Issue I have in the pass game is, number one, if you want to play in the pass game, you have to be able to block. And I still think he's got some issues in pass protection. And quite simply, I think Kellen Moore has proven that if you're going to bring an extra man, he'll leave his running back into block. We spoke about that when we did the Kellen Moore podcast, and I wrote about him in depth. So if you want to catch the ball, you've got to be able to block in this offense. And he did have some problems with drops.
Yes.
I think he's like a natural, like when you talk about running backs these days, there's a difference. To me, he's a running back. Like some running backs are the blur the lines between running backs and receivers. He is very much a running back. He is a catching the ball. He doesn't look like, say, Christian McCaffrey, who looks like a wide receiver when he catches the ball. He does have a couple of like inconsistent drops that you wish he didn't have. And I'm not going to talk like coaching points, but I think he doesn't look like it's natural to me. It looks like he's like almost concentrating too hard when catching the ball. So as a weapon, very much used because he's really good in tight spaces. So he's really good in the screen game. So he will be absolutely used in the Eagles passing game if he can get on the field, because that's a big skill of his. But just get a little bit prepared for a couple of drops. The other issues I had with Shipley, just very quickly, were fumbles. I put this in the overall, but unless you're like Saquon Barkley level good, you can't fumble. Like if you're a backup running back and you're not on the field very much, you simply cannot put the ball down because coaches just won't bother playing you. Like there is nothing that will end a backup running back's career quicker than fumbles. It's like if you're a star receiver, we can live with drops. If you're not a very good receiver, we can't accept drops because you're barely open. He had 4 fumbles this year, I think 8 the past few years. Without being mean, that just can't happen. Like, as I said, you don't want anyone to fumble, but if your star players fumble, you can accept it because the sort of the positives outweigh the negatives. If you're just an average rotational back, you can't do that. Like, can you imagine if Kenny Gainwell last year or Boston Scott were consistently fumbling, that they wouldn't be in the game. Somebody else would take their place. So fumble better, like a bit of a boring thing to talk about. We don't need to show any clips of it. The stats back that up. Drops, a little bit smaller for a like traditional feature back. So I think he's more of a running back 2, running back 3. But again, going in the 4th round isn't a problem. The reason why I think he went in the 4th, because he's got better film. Like, I think he's a better natural runner than some of the guys that went ahead of him in this class, is the lack of explosive speed. I think Tommy Lawler at Lawler NFL tweeted this out, and I've got it in the article. At Clemson, he was there for 3 years. He had 1 play that went for more than 50 yards. Now, that's not everything. Big plays are not the be-all and end-all of being a running back. And how many 50-yard runs do you really get in the NFL? Not many. But in terms of like receiving and rushing, normally you expect like really good running backs to have quite a few explosive plays in college because the field's wider. You do get more sort of, let's be honest, more points, I think, in general when you're doing it in the NFL. So 1 play of 50-plus yards is a little bit concerning. So I know there's a comment here which people are going to talk to me about how he tested in the 40. Again, sometimes testing doesn't match.
His testing was also a 4.45. The comment asked if Shipley run a 4.3. Said Shady ran a 4.45, and he broke away quite a bit in his career. I think there's 2 things there. I mean, Shipley ran a 4.45, But a 4.45 when Shady played is not the same as a 4.45 now. If you do draft stuff and you go look at like relative athletic scores, it's almost jarring when you see a defensive player that isn't above an 8.0 relative athletic score, because defenses are getting smaller and faster. So is offense. So that's one part of it. It's a bit of a different era, even though it's the same generation. We watch Shady, we were going to watch Shipley, but two, the athletic testing isn't always indicative of how they play. And you have guys where their testing doesn't match their tape all the time. And I think that's the case for Shipley. There's no doubt that his long speed just isn't quite there. And, we could show some plays. I had one that I left on the cutting floor, but there was one where it absolutely should have been a touchdown and he gets run down from behind. And you see that on the tape from Shipley.
Yeah, Shane, I've got that in my article, by the way, while I'm talking, if you want to quickly grab it just to show it. But yeah, no, it's a fair comment. The testing is, you'd think he would be better, but I'm telling you, we're not making up things. Number one, watch the tape, and he doesn't. Breakaway plays, the stats back that up. As I said, one play above 50 yards. He just didn't do it, and he didn't look like he had another gear. The other thing about RAS testing, or RAS testing, whatever you want to call it, as you've said, they're normally above 8 these days because of how much they prepare for this. He was ranked, if you want to look at 9.27 in the 40, 8.08 in the 20 yards. So he got quicker as time went on. But how many runs do you get in NFL where you get sort of 20 yards to get going? So he didn't explode away immediately. You've got the clip on the screen for anyone watching. I did see someone reply to me telling me he sort of stumbles, which is why he doesn't fully go. And I get that, but he's up to speed and it's not there. And it's not, again, it's a really good run. It's a very useful play. In fact, I wonder if that is the 50-yard play that, does he break 50? No, he doesn't, does he? He's slightly shorter because he starts on the 40. And I think he's tackled around the 20. He says.
No, that's the 50-yard play.
Oh, yeah, it might be just or thereabouts. So that is, you can see there the breakaway if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not, check the Bleeding Green article out, and it's on there. But to be honest, it's not a rocket science play to break down. He just can't do it. Last comment, then we'll move on from Shipley. Overall, this year, I do not expect him to be ahead of Kenny Gainwell. I think Kenny Gainwell's a better player than people give him credit for. I think people get frustrated with him because they were fascinated by Swift and Penny last year and he was taking snaps off them. I think he will eventually probably take his place as a running back 2 if he can deal with his drops and his fumbles. But I think he's probably more a running back 3 maybe this year, maybe towards the end of the year. I think the only thing he has in his favor is that I haven't seen Kenny Gainwell run an outside zone much. And if Kenny Gainwell can't do that, then I think it's possible that Shipley immediately becomes the running back 2. But I'm not, if I was a fantasy guy, I wouldn't really be rushing to pick him up if Barkley does go down for a game personally. How about you, Shane?
Yeah, same. Kenny Gainwell's a better pass blocker, and I think that's going to be the bread and butter. He's a better pass blocker, and he doesn't have the drop issues that Will Shipley has at times. And so I think there's going to be a earning the trust thing. We mentioned the fumbles. You can't have the negative plays. You got to earn the trust of your coaching staff. And I think the big places you get negative plays is allowing sacks, fumbling the ball, and dropping the ball when we bring it to you on checkdowns. And I think Shipley will do all 3 of those things at a higher rate than Gainwell. So I don't expect him to be running back 2 to start the year. I think he'll get on the field. And I think, we also didn't mention he's a good kick returner. And so you might see him on special teams. I think he's going to be a game day active for sure, but I would expect Gainwell to outsnap him at least early in the year.
Right. How do you pronounce the second guy, Shane? How do you pronounce the first name of?
It is Ainias Smith.
Before we talk about Ainias Smith, I will just say special teams is a theme from this Eagles draft class in general. There's a lot of guys that I think teams are not really sure with the new rules, how big of a part it's going to play. You maybe want multiple returners. I think Shipley is someone that can return, and Smith is also someone that we're going to talk about now. So, Shane, do you want to start us off as always? I think this is the most interesting player in the Eagles draft class. I've said it. What are the basic sort of numbers, et cetera, on Smith? Start us off.
Okay, so Ainias Smith is 5'9 3/8, which is 8th percentile among wide receivers. He is 190 pounds, which is 24th percentile. If you look at his spider chart, everything is just stacked on top of each other in the middle, except for his 92nd percentile bench press. And I always think spider charts like that are fascinating. If you look at his relative athletic score, he's only got a 7.36. He did not have, elite 40 times. In fact, the only things that are green on his spider or on his RAS chart are his 21 reps on the bench press and his 3-cone. He's extremely small. He's not really explosive when it comes to athletic testing. Now, if we talk about the stats, last season, and again, this is among 135 receivers who had 70 or more targets. He ranked 33rd in yards after catch per reception at 6.7. He was 6th in drop percentage, dropping only 1.9% of his targets. And he was 12th in missed tackles forced at 20. And then just overall his versatility, if you look at his snaps throughout his 5-year career at Texas A&M, he took 227 snaps aligned in the backfield, 1,364 in the slot, 419 at the boundary, and 338 snaps on special teams. So again, Jonny has an article up on Ainias Smith. His article for Trotter hasn't posted yet. It will soon, but you can go check that out. But Jonny, what stuck out to you when you watched Smith?
He's very fun. That's
Yes.
my basic analysis, is he's such a fun player. Like basically when you use the frame like Swiss Army knife, like he can do everything. Whether players like that sometimes just don't work because they don't do everything well, but he really can do everything. You mentioned the snaps. Like he's a running back, he's a receiver. He's that classic player that I think the league is going towards. I think the 49ers, as always, are sort of taking the lead in this, where he like blurs the lines between is he a back, is he a receiver? He's a little bit of both, but I think the problem. So he is much more of a receiver in the back. He is a receiver with sort of running back skills on things like jet sweeps, even screens, like yards after the catch, make defenders miss. Like he looks like a classic Kansas City Chiefs pick in that sense. You can imagine everyone going mad if Andy Reid drafted him. Not a explosive long speed guy, although it's funny because he has snaps where he burns by defensive backs. And when you see his 40 time and you see Shipley's 40 time and you think testing's weird. But short area quickness. I describe him as quicker rather than fast, which means 10 yards, which is more important than long speed most of the time as well. His route running is the thing that really impressed me. So 2 things really surprised me. I expected him to be like, the fast slot, fun guy, jet sweep. Everyone's got that guy. Like Malachi Corley was my guy in this year's class. Actually, he's more polished than I thought, which is why I'm a little surprised he went where he did. And I'll talk about why when we get to the weaknesses. But like, he's good at the top of his routes. He can run out. He's exposed out of his break. He has some really nice nuances to his route running. There's a really good clip that I don't know if we'll show today, but if not, it's in the article from Ben Fennell, where he's running like a deep over route, or I said route. The amount of times I use the American phrase, I go back and forth on that all the time, Shane. Over route. I'm going to stay British, stay true to myself, where his head and his neck, his shoulders are all like leaning towards the inside, and when he cuts it outside, and you see like nuances that you want to see from him. Also, though he's really small, he is really tough. So special teams experience, blocking experience, like extremely willing blocker, extremely willing to take hits in the middle of the field, can hang on some difficult catches, like good contact balance. Like I think people have described him as like a budget Devo Samuel, and he's a little bit like that. He's just a fun player to watch in general. I'm talking about how much fun he is, Shane. Do you want to queue up some of the clips that you have so we can talk about some of the things that he does really well? Because if you haven't watched any of his highlights, I do recommend going to watch him. Someone on my article compared him as like a Golden Tate type, and I like that comparison quite a lot as well. So talk to me about a few of these clips.
So he's not a burner by any means, but he is slippery and he can change directions really quickly. And so this play I just think is so fun. He's running a crossing route here, and you see him catch this ball, and all his momentum is carrying him to the sideline, and he's going to be able to get upfield instead of going out of bounds. But watch the move that he puts on defenders on the sideline here. Just that side juke, like that's all over his film. He loves to get that guy running at him sideways, and then he's just able to juke back to the middle of the field. And, he makes 3 guys miss here and is able to get into the end zone on a play that he probably should have been down inside the 10. And that's what you see a lot from him. It's not running away from guys. It's just that slipperiness in the open field That was one of the biggest things that really jumped out to me watching his stuff.
Shane, can I just say as well, when you think of the player in your head that we're talking about, you probably think of like what I think of: bubble screens, jet sweeps, quick slants. He runs a lot of deep over, which I think is quite common, and then he runs a lot of really good corner, like good corner routes, post corner. Like that's his best route, I think, is that intermediate out, and we know that Hurts throws a beautiful corner route. It's probably Hurts' best ball, actually. I think that intermediate out. The Eagles run a lot of levels or 3-level stretch plays, or they have done in the past. Whether they'll continue to do so, we'll see. But Hurts throws a really nice intermediate out ball, and I think that's his best route. He's not just a short player. He's not just good in the quick game. He can run some intermediate routes as well. You see him at the Senior Bowl running the deep in for dagger, which is a 15-20 yard in breaking route basically, and he dives low and catches it. He's a little bit of he's a little bit good at everything. Any other clips you want to show before I talk about why I think he may have fallen outside of the top 3 rounds? Because the way we're talking about him makes it sound like he should have gone a lot earlier.
Yeah, I've got a couple more here. I actually have 4 clips of him. So my second one, you would think a guy this profile would struggle into contact, and he really doesn't. He's good at, this is him in the slot here, and he's going to take a huge shot at the catch point here. Now, he is not a contested catch receiver, but he is not afraid to elevate over the middle of the field and take a hit, and he hangs onto the ball. And you see that in his drop numbers. I mean, that's a big hit for a 5'9" guy to take in the back as he's catching the ball, and he just hangs on to it. And so he's a tremendously tough player. I think he's reliable over the middle of the field. He's really good at sitting down in zone coverage. And then you've got his punt return ability. Now, his punt return ability is a mixed bag, because I'll show this one and there's another one I'm not going to show. And there's a common theme in these. And the common theme is that he muffs the punt and then recovers it and returns it for a touchdown. And you really don't want to see, your punt returner putting the ball in the turf, much less twice in one season. But both times he stays with it and he runs it back for a touchdown. And this one doesn't go for a touchdown, but watch the number of guys that he makes miss up the field here. He has another one he returns for a touchdown. But he's up the sideline, that juke to the middle of the field. 1 guy misses, 2 guys, 3 guys miss. And, it slows him down enough that he gets run down from behind. But he's very dynamic, and I think you could see him used as a punt returner. With the new kick return rules, maybe you see him used that way too. Now, the last one I want to show is, we talked about his deep threat, his speed. He's more short area quickness. But I just want you to watch this rep and see if you notice anything about it. This is going to be a touchdown to him. He's running upfield here. And I just want you tell me if you notice something on this clip here. And the cut's kind of made off screen, but all of a sudden he's 5 yards behind the defensive back. And Jonny, do you know why I showed this particular clip?
Is it because of who he beats, Shane, on the route?
It is. That defensive back that he's 5 yards behind. I'll pause it here and you can catch it. That's Brian Branch, drafted by the Lions, fell way too far and had a tremendous rookie season. And that's Ainias Smith just burning Brian Branch, who is at his best in the slot, out of the slot for a deep touchdown. So that's a nice little gem from 2 years ago. So he can get vertical, but that's not necessarily his game. But I just thought that was a funny one.
Yeah, I included that in the article. It's a bit unfair on Brian Branch because it's such a hard cover when you're in the slot and you can go left, right. Right, we've sang Smith's praises for a while. He was a 5th round pick, wasn't he? He wasn't a 4th for Shipley. So if you're wondering, well, how did this guy drop? Because there's a few comments coming in as well about sort of how much fun he is. Antonio, who watched him a lot of Texas A&M, talking about how good he is. And you're right, when you turn on the film, he looks that good. Anthony also saying if you watch his highlights, he looks awesome, and I agree. So reasons why. Right, I have a couple of theories about this. The obvious answer that if you want me to give me is that he's a slot-only guy, I think, of the next level. People are going to hate this comparison, but his college film is a little bit Jalen Reagor-y. And remember that Jalen Reagor was a 1st-round pick, by the way, so the college film was fun. But the problem with those guys are sometimes they get forced outside and they can't play outside. I don't think he's going to run through physical contacts. I think physical corners that can press him, get their hands on him, he's going to really struggle. So I think he's going to play in the slot only. as we mentioned, he's not a burner. So when you look at teams who have like, I always talk about like the criteria, they have sort of like numbers that they want to aim for at each position to limit sort of risk. He's a 4.55 guy at 190. There are certain teams that are going to say straight away, do you know what? We don't want a 4.55 guy who's 190. Just, I'm not saying that's the right way of doing it, but teams have these like sort of criteria. And we'll talk about actually more of that with Trotter coming up next. So I think he's a slot only receiver. I think he's been injured in the past and he's very small when you always worry about guys that are smaller who can only play in the slot. I think the two big reasons why I think he fell are basically the modern NFL doesn't like slot only players. I listened to a really interesting discussion with one of my favorite podcasts, The Read Optional with Ollie Connolly, and whoever else is the co-host on there, talking about who's the guy who came out in the first round? Lab McConkey, or second round this year. Just basically talking about his value only works if he can play outside. And we spoke about this pre-draft as well, is that teams don't like having slot only guys because they have so many players that can line up in the slot. So if you stick Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, and Smith out there, you're going to expect that he's going to be in the slot. Therefore, teams can project where Brown and Devontae Smith are going to line up. It just makes it more predictable. If you compare that to someone like Paris Campbell, who's probably going to start in the slot this year for the Eagles, he's not 5'9", 190. Like, I can't remember what Paris Campbell weighed in at the combine, but I'm pretty sure he is a lot bigger than you would think as I'm frantically Googling it. I'm sure he was like 6'1", 6 foot 205, so bigger. And that means he can potentially play outside. So he gives you more versatility. And a lot of teams don't like having slot-only players because it limits what you can do offensive, sort of design-wise. The second reason is blocking wide receivers have a massive part in the run game these days. So if you ever watch the Rams, they're the absolute best at this. Cooper Kupp and Nakua are unbelievably good at blocking in the run game. They have a lot of clips where they run duo and they actually use their wide receiver to motion in and block the C gap. Like, you can't do that. He wants to be a good blocker, Smith, and he tries really hard, but he's 5'9", 190. You're not going to really get him taking on linebackers. And he tries and he has effort, but he's not nothing to do with how exciting he is as a player. I think all the positives we said are true. I just think smaller guys that aren't burners, like when you're talking about like your Worthies, you go in the first round running like in the 4.2s. When you draft smaller guys, they need to be exceptional at something. And I don't think he's a burner. I think having a slot-only player limits your versatility. And I'm not saying he will definitely be slot-only, but I think if you play him outside and he's going to start getting pressed by corners, I think he might struggle. There's a few clips of him at the Senior Bowl where he struggled with physicality as well. And I think blocking-wise in the run game is a big deal. So that's like my sort of summary of why I think he fell, considering how fun he is. In saying that, I think this year he'll be a special teams and a sort of minimal touch guy you can use. And I think potentially he could even take that wide receiver free job off Paris Campbell this year or next year and could be a really handy special teamer who's your wide receiver free, wide receiver 4, and won't kill you like Quez Watkins did this past year. So I really like the pick. I just think it's fair for balance to point out he is a 5th round pick and there are reasons why receivers like him don't go as early as maybe we'd like.
Yeah. He also doesn't separate well against man coverage. He's really good against zone, like sitting down in those soft spots, but I didn't think he separates super well against man. Although if a team is giving you man coverage, you have 3 guys in AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert who generate great matchups against man. And so he would be your 4th option at best, maybe your 5th option at best, if you think about Jalen Hurts being able to run against man coverage as well. But ultimately, Ainias Smith, he cannot, his ceiling in the NFL is a wide receiver 3. Like, he cannot, there is no chance that I'm going to get old takes exposed on this someday because he's a wide receiver 1 for a team. He just can't. His skill set, his body type, it doesn't have wide receiver 1 or even really 2 ability. And that's part of why he falls. If you're going to roll the dice, you want to roll the dice, most teams, on a guy that, hey, if he hits, it's Puka Nacua, and that's not Ainias Smith, but he brings intriguing potential as a wide receiver 3, especially for a team that has guys clearly ahead of him in the pecking order. And so I think that's part of why he fell down, but why I'm excited to see him play.
Yeah, if you look at someone like, final point, then we'll get on to Trotter. If you look at someone like Malachi Corley, who I liked, I think you can make an argument that Smith is a lot more polished as a player than Corley was. Corley's 5'11", 210. It sort of is to an extent. Like, you can develop a 5'11", 210 player into a starting wide receiver, and he can impact you as a blocker. He might be able to take snaps outside. When you're 5'9", 190, you're just sort of limited as a player. And at the next level, he's just not going to get as many opportunities. However, low touch explosive players are important. And if he can add 1 or 2 explosive plays every 3 or 4 weeks, that's sometimes all you need from a day 3 pick. I think he will make the team, and I think he is like a proper player. He's not just like a gadget guy who can just run fast. Like, I think he's a proper receiver who understands how to play the position. Speaking of players who know how to play the position, Shane, a little transition there. Shall we, as we've gone on ages, as we always do, should we talk about Jeremiah Trotter, who might be the most interesting draft pick from this entire draft class? So give me the lowdown on why he fell, because all you need to do is look at his measurements and you'll be able to tell why he fell.
Yeah, look at that transition, by the way, that segue. That's great. So Jeremiah Trotter Jr. drafted with the 155th pick, 5th round draft pick. He is 6 foot even, which is 10th percentile, 228 pounds, which is 11th percentile, with 31.5-inch arms. That is 25th percentile. If you go look at his relative athletic score, he did not receive a score because he didn't complete enough testing. He didn't do the jumps or the 40. However, he did do the agilities, and they weren't that good. A 4.4 shuttle, a 7.13 3-cone. And so if you want to talk about why Trotter fell, he is undersized, and he is not an elite athlete at the position. In fact, he's a below average athlete. So we go to his stats. Trotter Jr. had 28 pressures on 102 pass rush reps this season. That's a 27.5% pressure rate. And so he's good as a block, or he's good as a pass rusher. There's a specific rep. I was going to save this. I'm just going to show it now. There's a specific pass rush rep against Notre Dame that I just love. And I tweeted it before the draft. I tweeted it on draft night. I tweeted it again. It's just incredible because he's going to line up as a blitzer, and the running back has him all the way, and he just makes the guy miss in a phone booth and gets the sack. And so he's tremendously talented as a blitzer. And of course we get the axe throw down there, but you just watch this one more time and you tell me there's not a use for that from a guy like Fangio, who loves to blitz his linebackers. So we know Fangio loves to send a linebacker. He loves to drop out an edge rusher. And so you think about that, he's going to be good in that role. However, he's a poor tackler. He had a 16.3% missed tackle rate this last season. And then per PFF, he allowed 24 receptions on 27 targets for 224 yards and a touchdown, with 2 interceptions and 2 pass breakups. And you ask, how could he only have 3 incompletions when targeted, but have 2 interceptions and 2 pass breakups? And the answer is, I don't know. Somebody at PFF must have miscounted. But per their stats, 24 of 27, but he had 2 interceptions and 2 pass breakups. So fun little Easter egg there in the PFF charting. Jonny, your article for Trotter is not out yet, but it is written. I've had a preview of it. What are some of your strengths when you look at Trotter Jr.?
Firstly, 2 weeks in a row we're throwing shade at PFF. We've got to be careful. We love their work just for certain things, not for other things. Right, so strengths for Trotter. Firstly, already got a comment coming in about this from Anthony. I've put that as my number 1 strength. Like, bloodline in football absolutely matters. If you are telling me that football like bloodline doesn't matter, just literally look at some of the best players we've seen. You've got the 2 Manning brothers as the most famous one, but obviously we've got Marvin Harrison in this draft class. Like, of course it matters. You're being brought up in a culture of football where you're probably watching film from a young age. And guess what? It's no surprise that his ability to key and diagnose and his awareness is just exceptionally good. His instincts are brilliant. When coming downhill, he can read the play out really quickly. He can close quickly. He is very small, and being very small is a problem, but there's also benefits. He can use that to his advantage. And I'm going to show a clip of this shortly, where he basically avoids blocks rather than takes them on, because that's the way he plays. He can run sideline to sideline. He's quick enough in pursuit. I don't really worry about his speed a great deal. I think in zone coverage, he's really good. I think this is where his awareness comes in and why Fangio probably enjoyed the film a lot, because I think you can definitely teach him to sort of play in a Fangio style, where I think when he reads the quarterback's eyes, I think he's really strong. I think it will take time, as everyone does, to adjust to this defense. But I think he's strong in zone coverage. Interception numbers, you mentioned, are really good. His blitzing is extremely good. The Eagles have now got 2 linebackers in the Kobe Dean and Trotter, who maybe are too small to play together. But if the Kobe Dean misses time, which he always does, you could easily have Trotter replacing his pass rushing skill set. So I really like him. I really like him. Physical, aggressive, just looks the part of a linebacker. Before we get into why he fell, and I think it's fair to point out the Eagles also let him fall a while because they had a massive need at linebacker and didn't touch him until day 3 and late in day 3 as well. You've got another clip I know lined up where he reads play action, which is an awesome play. So do you want to talk about this one? And then I'll talk you through one of the other ones that I sent to you before, Shane.
Yeah, so let's just roll this play. And I want you to watch Trotter, and I want you to watch the linebacker next to him and how quickly they just compare their reaction time to realizing this is play action and going from run defense to pass defense. And so I'll just roll the clip here. You see how much quicker Trotter is to react to that. And that is a really tough play to read out because you got play action. I mean, it's essentially the little RPO play action that the Eagles like to run, where you scrape somebody across the formation and you try to roll out and throw the ball to that guy. And Trotter picks this guy up immediately. He takes like one step and then he's out on the receivers. Like there's something wrong. A receiver is running the opposite direction that everything else is going. And he just picks up on that and he's off to the races. And when you look at the linebacker next to him and that reaction time, and yeah, they've got different responsibilities, but it takes that other linebacker a couple more steps to really plant and start to drop into his pass depth. And that's what you see on his film. I think that play is just a good representative sample of his football IQ. He's not the fastest guy, but he's almost always the first guy to react correctly to a play.
Shane, we've watched that play about 500 times the past 3 years, and no one ever reads it. Like no one covers that play. He diagnoses that so quickly. That's film study. That's preparation. Do you want to bring up the clip, the first one that I sent you before we started as well? So when we talk about being small, it means you have to play a certain way. So an old school 250-pound linebacker would go charging into a pulling guard, take him head on, and then blow up the run play. Trotter can't do that. So basically, he has to win by being small. So it is a problem, but you could also use. If you see this clip here, it shows a better angle, Shane, I think, after this from the backside, where he just doesn't want to take on. There's a left guard, I believe, who's trying to get to the second level and get towards him, and he just makes a miss. But that's hard. It looks easy, but if you watch his eyes, he's looking at the running back the whole time. He's diagnosing that. So he's almost got a natural feel for the guard coming because he doesn't look at the guard barely at all because he's constantly got his eyes on the running back. And that's quite an open block as well. The guard's got like quite a lot of space there. It's not the most difficult block in the world. And Trotter's not good enough to take him on. Like Trotter is not going to blow up the guard. He's too small. Like 300-pound guards, 310-pound NFL guards are going to basically win against him. And we'll get into that when we talk about his weaknesses. For him to win, he has to win like that. And if you read the play quickly, you can avoid the offensive lineman. I think he could legitimately start. Like he won't start this year, but I think he could. And I think he could be okay. Like I know he went late, and I know I shouldn't bet on him being starter. NFL teams ignored him because of his size. He went to the 5th, and he should be a backup. But I don't think you can teach instincts. And there's just something about watching him play where I just think he gets it. And I might be wrong, and he might flame out because he might be too small. He might miss too many tackles. And I think the tackles is the one thing that I worry about. Have you got any other clips, Shane, of positives, or do you want me to talk about the sort of weaknesses?
No, let's get into the weaknesses.
So, sorry, my screen started to hang there. I was looking at one of my clips. You've already mentioned most of them, to be fair. The most obvious one is he's too light. Basically, that's the big problem. And we mentioned about this with Smith lastly, but NFL teams will have set criteria, and a lot of teams just won't touch a linebacker at his size. Like, he will just be off their board. And his biggest issue is taking on offensive linemen at the point of attack. Again, I go back to that 250-pound old school linebacker. Like, he does not get off blocks, Trotter. If you get your hands on him, he's in trouble. because of that, I think he has to read everything so quickly. He can sometimes be too over aggressive, I think, because he's almost overcompensating for his lack of size. So he has to read things quicker than a normal, say, size linebacker does. And I think that means he can sometimes be a little bit over aggressive. He can overrun the play. There was one play that I didn't like, which when you watch it, I sent it to you as well, Shane, if you queue it up now, where basically he gets blocked by a wide receiver. And you might be thinking, oh, well, that's a disaster. Like linebackers getting blocked by receivers. And he's not just like blocked a bit, like he's pretty much taken out the play. And then you realize that wide receivers these days, I mean, look at Johnny Wilson, are literally bigger than him. So it's no surprise that a linebacker by a receiver, if you had said that 10 years ago, you'd think that was mental, like 250, 260 pound linebackers. Trotter is not 250 pounds. He's not 260 pounds. He's going to be smaller, for example. I mean, 6', 228 is not big. Like we're talking pretty small. So he will face receivers that are bigger than 6', 228 that will be able to block him, let alone offensive guards, centers, the athletes we see on the offensive line position these days. So his game is going to come down to two things. Can he diagnose quickly enough? And can he avoid blocks? Because he's not going to get off them. I don't believe he's suddenly going to start like shedding blocks and taking on guards at the point of attack anytime soon. I think his game will come down to, can he avoid them? Can the Eagles keep him clean with their big guys up front? Because they've got a very undersized linebacker core. So I think they obviously are relying on their defensive line to keep him clean. But I do really like him. Like my gut, I said this in the article that hasn't been posted yet, but I said my gut feeling is that I don't like speculating that 5th round picks will start, but I think he will, either maybe not this year, but next year. I think he could have starting linebacker potential. And let's be honest, we know this organization doesn't value linebackers. And if Devin White goes next year and maybe one other, like there's a chance he could be sort of chucked up the depth chart pretty quickly, because the odds of him competing with a big money free agent or 1st round pick next year are very unlikely. So I think the Eagles almost need him to work as well. I would just say, like, scheme wise, I worry a little bit that he's in a crowded room with smaller linebackers as well, and whether that will limit his behind someone like Ben Van Sumeren, who can take on guards a little bit better than him. I don't know, but I do like the player. I've sort of rambled on a little bit. So what do you? I don't think I've actually ever heard your opinion, Shane, properly. Do you like agree with me on Trotter to finish up this one, or do you think I'm maybe a little bit too, let's just say, in love with the film with his dad that I've watched in the past?
No, I'm with you on most of what you say about him. I had him number 73 overall on my big board, and so I think he was great value where he was drafted. I get every concern. He's small. He doesn't have, I would say he has average to below average, slightly below average athleticism. And when you combine that with being small, that's a problem. But he tries to make up for it with that IQ. I think particularly for the Eagles, who just have nothing at linebacker, you could see him come in and make an impact. And the concerns are there. He has a weak base against the run. And you talked about his inability to anchor against offensive linemen. And we showed the clip where he avoids the guard. And that works sometimes. But athletic linemen can catch that move and just use it to push him out of the gap even easier. And when you go from college to the NFL, everybody gets more athletic. And so I am very concerned about that. I'm concerned that Devin White is not a good run defender, and Kobe Dean is small, and Jeremiah Trotter is small, and I'm worried the Eagles will just be totally exposed by the run game this year. And so you're going to have to rely on your interior defensive line to keep guys clean. And oh, by the way, Fletcher Cox just retired. And so there's concerns there when you think holistically for the Eagles. But, maybe you're helped by the fact that you've got a Sidney Brown who's good coming downhill. You've got a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. You think back to last week's episode when we talked about maybe playing Cooper DeJean in the slot because he's such a good run defender. And there's just trade-offs there. If you're going to go so light at linebacker, you might have to put a guy that's not as fluid in the slot so he can help set that edge. You might have to have your safeties come flying downhill a little quicker. So you're going to have to trust your corners on an island a little more. So it's all give and take. And, Trotter is just part of what the Eagles have done at linebacker, and that is be small and take guys late and not really invest premium assets into the position. I think that his skill set is remarkably similar to Nakobe Dean's. Both really smart players, both good blitzers, both undersized but decent in coverage. And then would Nakobe Dean have worked? I don't know. Nakobe Dean hasn't stayed healthy, and so we haven't been able to see that. But I think he's good insurance for Nakobe Dean. I think out of the two of them combined, you can get replacement level linebacker play, which would be a huge improvement. So the last thing I would note on Trotter, and I mentioned it earlier, he had that high missed tackle rate, 16.3% last season. And a lot of it is because he leaves his feet to make tackles in the open field. He's not a sound tackler. He's a hard hitter, and you see some highlight reps where he knocks guys backwards, but down in, down out, he's not the most steady tackler that you'll see either.
Yeah, I think when you go through the weaknesses, it doesn't sound good. Like if it doesn't work out, there's a reason why he fell. But I keep going back to, it's very easy to look at all the weaknesses. When you actually go and watch him play, like the instincts are there. The ability to diagnose what's being run is there. Like I think there's a lot more positives than negatives. And I'm genuinely thrilled the Eagles got him when they did. I had him like you. I think you may have even been slightly higher. And I don't rank players, but I had him like round 3-ish, round 3 to 4. But I would have taken him in the 3rd round. Funny enough, if you just bump up or swap Trotter and Jalix Hunt, but it's all about upside, and you can totally understand why Trotter fell. And I do think a lot of teams will honestly have just taken him off their board. Yeah, I saw that comment coming as well. It is absolutely not about size. It is not just about that. Instincts are way more important of a linebacker position. And I also think speed is overrated because like instincts equal speed as well, because if you read things quicker, you get there quicker anyway. Trotter's just not a great overall profile, but if you want to bet like I am on instincts and the ability to play the position, and I am absolutely including his dad in this as well, by the way. I know I shouldn't, but I just can't help when I'm taking into analysis that he has been brought up in a family that probably talks about football and the linebacker position all the time. And if you're telling me that stuff doesn't matter, I don't think it's true. I think it absolutely will make a difference, the upbringing that he's had. And I imagine he's been around the linebacker position for a long time and will be a coach's dream to work with. So yeah, overall, I like actually a Shipley I wasn't a big fan of, but the other 2 picks, and Shipley's fine. I'm not anti-Shipley. I just think I would have gone in a slightly different direction. But the other 2 picks, I really enjoyed that we broke down today. So yeah, I think overall it was a pretty good start to day 3 for the Eagles.
All right. Well, that is going to about do it for this episode. We will be back next week, probably doing the last 3 draft picks. We might come up with something else and put that one off another week, but we'll let you guys know. As always, thank you for joining. All ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated. We had a new rating come in on Apple iTunes, a 5-star rating that said, BGN Radio going dark was devastating, but finding out some of the shows banded together to start a new feed was a breath of fresh air. So excited to see Shane, Jonny, and John back on the air, and I'm enjoying the new Birds of the Round Table too. Can't wait to see what you guys cook up for a post-game show. Go Birds. So thank you for that rating and review. If you have not left us a review, we would greatly appreciate it to help get the feed out there to new people. We will have a new episode from John going through the 2024 season and his Eagles Memories episode later this week. Jonny and I will also be recording a mailbag. We're going to do a monthly mailbag that will be exclusive to our Patreon members. And you can head over to patreon.com/ontheshanepage to subscribe. We have a $3 and a $5 tier with various perks, including an ad-free version of this podcast. We have a monthly mailbag. When we get into the season, you guys will have a little bit of creative control over the podcast where you can help us pick players to spotlight on the show. And we have a Discord server where you can hop in and just chat with us about whatever. So be sure and check that out. You can get a 1-week trial if you want to check it out before you make any sort of commitment. But we certainly appreciate you guys. We appreciate everybody that listens to the show as well. Jonny, before we get out of here, do you have any final thoughts that you need to fire off?
No, you nailed it as always. Massively thank you for listening. And I will shout out John's first podcast. I listened to it while cleaning on Sunday. It's like a very much, I said to you, like, I love the idea of like a series. It's almost like an audio book. John is such a great storyteller. So for those of you that were too young or were into the sport like myself in 2004, I've watched the DVDs and stuff and I know about it all, but to actually hear it like go through like stage by stage, it was awesome. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. Support the network. Obviously support us, but support the network in any way you can. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Thank you, Antonio and Anthony, you guys both chiming in here in the live comments. Thanks for joining the show today. We will catch you guys next week for a new episode of On the Shane Page. Go Birds.